everyone, my name is Tanae, and I did my project on carbohydrate loading and ATP production, and basically how it affects you when you're working out. So, what does carbohydrate loading mean? This means consuming above the normal amount of recommended carbohydrates prior to the athletic event, to give the body basically more energy. So a lot of athletes tend to carb load before they go on like a cross country meet, or I personally used to do it before high jumping or soccer. So I think it's beneficial. So what is ATP? ATP is short for adenotriphosphate or adenosine triphosphate. Basically, it's a small molecule that helps with energy production inside of the cell as well as metabolism. So through glycolysis, it'll produce more energy inside of the cell, and ultimately ATP is going to help with muscular contraction, which will help with muscular endurance as well. So when an athlete carb loads, they're really just consuming an abundance of carbs the day before an athletic event, like I had said previously. This is used to increase the ATP and early onset of muscular fatigue. So each athlete in this study is going to be weighed, and we're going to look at what their normal carbohydrate intake should be. Based upon that intake, we're going to multiply it by 3, and that's the intake of carbs that they are going to be intaking throughout this case study. So the first time that they weigh themselves, they're still going to be on the normal carb intake that they should be doing as just a normal person. But once we actually start the case study, they're going to start intaking the higher amount. This amount of carbs, which is going to vary per individual, obviously, is going to be given to them throughout rices, pastas, and breads. There are some vegetables that are also kind of high in carbs, so we may incorporate that as well. Carb loading can be done 2 to 4 hours prior to a race or event of any sort, but when you carb load before an event, you have that chance of being lethargic from being too full, or having just that low amount of energy because your body's almost like it wants to go to sleep because it had such a great meal. So it's better to carb load before the day before the event rather than carb loading on the exact same day, hours before the event. So carbohydrate loading will result in an increased production of ATP. That is basically my hypothesis of this. We're going to be testing that and seeing if it is actually true. And then, how does ATP contribute to muscular contraction? So, like I said previously, muscular contraction is based upon ATP as well. It'll bind to myosin, and myosin will make the muscle contract, which is pretty awesome. So for the way that we're going to go about this research, there's going to be 2 groups. It's going to be 2 groups of 2 individuals. So the first group is going to complete various tests with and without carbohydrate loading. Actually, both groups are going to do that. After completing this, we're going to have questionnaires for them to fill out, and they're going to tell me exactly how they feel post and prior to the test that I've given them, which is the mile run with the stadium stairs directly after it. So this is a workout that could definitely just make you tired. Your muscles are going to be extremely fatigued, but I want to see what the difference is between carb loading and not carb loading. So the second group is going to be my placebo group. This group, they're going to think that they're carb loading, but in reality, they're not going to. So they're going to have like the veggie-based pastas. They're going to keep their carbohydrate intake at the same level that it was prior to starting this testing. So in the first and second weeks of this project or this case study, they are going to be remaining on the low carb diet or just the average carbs that they're intaking. On the third and fourth weeks, this is when the athletes are going to be required to intake more carbs, and they're going to do a 5K at the end of the fourth week. So the third week, the groups will complete this run without carb loading, and focus will be primarily on muscular endurance and completing the race. The fourth week, I want them to really feel the difference between carb loading and not carb loading, and they're going to focus on muscular endurance. So we're going to be focusing on the fatigue of the muscle rather than just completing the race, as well as we're going to focus on some of the respiratory as well. We want to see how their body is reacting to the higher intake of carbohydrates and the higher production of ATP. So when should the athletes feel a change in the performance? Based upon the surveys that I got back, they felt the change in their performance within the second and third week. At the end of the fourth week, because of the fact that their body, I feel, was a little more trained, they didn't feel so much of a change in performance because they had already started carb loading. They were already getting used to the way that their body felt carb loading in comparison to not carb loading. How will this affect athletes' carb loading? If carb loading is done the same day, like I said, I tried not to have them do it the same day because of the fact that they could be more lethargic. And that's the last thing you want when you're competing. You don't want to be tired in your race or your soccer game or your marathon. You don't want to be lethargic. You kind of need to be focused and just ready to attack. Does ATP really contribute to muscular endurance and prevent fatigue? Yes, it does. Mainly because of the fact that it's the higher energy in the cell, which is going to produce more ATP, and that's great. But also it's because of the fact that the muscles are going to contract more. It's going to help with muscular contraction. So if there's more energy to contract the muscle, the fatigue's not going to set in as fast as it would if there was not enough energy to help the muscle contract. That's when you're going to feel muscular fatigue. How does ATP affect the muscular tissues? That's where we go into the binding of myosin and muscular contraction. So it plays off of the first question a little bit as well. Overall, did the athletes feel a difference between normal eating habits and carbohydrate loading before the event? From the last question that I put on their survey, this is what I put on there. Did you feel a change between week 1 and 2 in comparison to week 3 and 4? Every athlete did say that they felt a complete different change in week 3 and 4 due to carb loading. Now, where this may not be reliable is the fact that half of the group was on the placebo effect. So they felt that it was making a difference when in reality it was just their bodies kind of getting used to training at a higher level. As far as the other athletes, they said that it did make a huge difference in their performance. So for them, I could take that, but still the reliability in it could be a little off since the placebo team is still saying that they felt a really big difference as well. And that's the end of that. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.